Wrestling fans. Pro Wrestle Machine here with another query. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Now to the broadcast. December 16, 1991 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. The End of Portland Wrestling. And Dynamite Kid's Career. By Observer Staff. What could be the beginning of the end for the oldest active pro wrestling promotion in the world, and what appears to be the end of the career of one of the greatest workers in pro wrestling history headlined the news this past week. This past Sunday, KPTV Channel 12 in Portland, Oregon, announced the cancellation of Portland Wrestling, a Saturday night institution throughout the state of Oregon for the past 38 years. The final episode of Portland Wrestling will run on December 28. The program, which had a history of strong ratings and a cult following, fell victim to high production costs, which the station was paying for, and declining ratings in the wake of television oversaturation and declining interest in pro wrestling. On Monday in the Oregonian, Portland promoter Don Owen said that he didn't know if the cancellation would signal the end of the promotion. Owen Promotions is the oldest active wrestling company in North America, and probably the world, dating back to the mid-1920s when it was founded by Don's father, Herb Owen. Don Owen, who was the last surviving member of the old guard of NWA wrestling promoters, started as a ring announcer for his father in 1931. This past Saturday night, the cancellation of the show was acknowledged throughout the show by announcer Don Koss, who asked fans to write letters to KPTV, thanking them for 40 years of running weekly wrestling on television. Nobody badmouthed this station, which probably would have been edited off the air, and Koss asking for letters accentuated writing positive letters, although it was clearly a last-ditch effort to get the station to change its mind. During the show, in just about every interview, it was said that even though wrestling is scheduled to go off the air, that there would continue to be live wrestling every Saturday night at the Portland Sports Arena, a converted bowling alley owned by Owen. Although crowds in recent weeks had topped 800 fairly often, the crowd this past Saturday fell off to just a few hundred. One wonders how long a regular nightly circuit can continue without a television show. While most feel the 79-year-old Owen will at least attempt to continue to run without television, it seems a long shot at best that he'll be able to continue for any length of time except perhaps the Saturday night show, since Owen owns the building, thus keeps all concession revenue. Owen didn't pay KPTV for the show, but the station provided the production personnel and equipment. There were several factors involved in the cancellation according to an article in Monday's Oregonian. The main factor was the steadily declining ratings in recent years. In addition, the station was planning on leasing some of its production facilities and didn't want to maintain a commitment for every Saturday night. A third reason was the financial problems encountered by the show's sponsor, Tom Peterson. With Peterson, an appliance store operator who was also a cult figure in Portland since the 1950s, filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the show was without a sponsor. An additional reason was negotiations KPTV has had with both World Championship Wrestling and a World Wrestling Federation, which already runs one of its tapes on Saturday morning on the station, to supply them with tapes to put in the time slot, which would mean it could continue to broadcast wrestling on Saturday nights with the bigger name stars, and without the expense of producing the show. While Owen may be able to continue drawing a few hundred hardcores weekly on Saturday nights without television, the lack of television would make it almost impossible to interest new fans in his product and would make it nearly impossible to continue running a full schedule of spot shows. Without the spot shows, which will clearly dwindle down to nothing before the traditional Saturday night Portland crowds will, it will be impossible to use any wrestlers except those who already live in the area and have regular jobs, and just wrestle a time or two per week as a moonlighting job. There are enough wrestlers who have settled in the area and have regular jobs to where that is feasible, but this would seem to eliminate the idea of wrestlers coming in to gain experience, which was the main value to the pro wrestling business at large of a regional territory such as this one in 1991. If Owen Promotions does close up fully, or simply cuts its schedule back to weekly shows, it would leave the Tennessee-based Jarrett Promotions as the final full-time territory to survive the fallout of the national expansion of the WWF and WCW from more than 30 offices a decade ago. With the demise of the next to the last of the full-time regional offices, the problem of where to find new talent becomes even greater. Right now the problem isn't as severe as it could be, since the WWF is pretty much considered the place to go by most wrestlers, so they can eventually siphon off the young American talent that has been lucky enough to get regular work in Japan and gain experience in that way. WCW has taken another route, basically taking tall bodybuilders right out of the gym with no experience and attempting to push them as new stars, although its attempts to do so have largely been major failures. The situation isn't quite desperate yet, but both WWF and WCW have to consider the feasibility of supporting a farm system of sorts using veterans who are stale nationwide to teach green newcomers the ropes until they're ready to explode on the national scene. It's the lack of these new stars with enough ring savvy to make things fresh that is part of the reason both groups are having so much trouble drawing right now, Because the vast majority of talent isn't fresh. Tom Billington, aka Dynamite Kid, considered one of the top 5 workers in the business during the early 1980s, announced his retirement this past Friday night upon completion of the 1991 All Japan Tag Team Tournament Tour in Tokyo's Budokan Hall. Billington, who turned 33 the previous day, was told by his doctors that he could no longer wrestle due to all the punishment his body had taken over a 17-year career as a daredevil. Aside from constant back problems stemming from the key injury 5 years ago while he was working in the WWF that changed him from one of the world's top workers to a guy riding mainly on his reputation, he was also plagued by shoulder, knee and neck problems. It was the neck injuries, with 3 discs being messed up, that caused doctors to tell Billington that one more bad bump would do in his spine for good. Although there was no publicity prior to the Budokan show that Billington would be calling it quits, there was a ceremony in the ring with members of the All Japan office giving him farewell gifts. A surprise party in his honor was arranged by Stan Hansen after the show, with the All Japan wrestlers bidding him farewell. Apparently Billington will be moving from Calgary, where he has lived since leaving England in 1978, back home to Manchester, England. Billington, who started as a boxer in his early teens and was also an excellent youth soccer player, was the hottest young wrestler in England, immediately given the nickname of Dynamite Kid as a 154-pound teenager when he started in 1975. He was something of a teeny bopper heartthrob when British wrestling was still carried on network television. By the time he was 19 and just 175 pounds, he was brought over to North America by Stu Hart as a heel, and was almost immediately the best worker in the territory and created a style of fast-paced, high-impact, incredible bump wrestling that Stampede Wrestling was later to become famous for. He debuted for New Japan Pro Wrestling in July of 1979 as a contender for then WWF World Junior Heavyweight Champion Tatsumi Fujinami. Along with Satoru Sayama, the original Tiger Mask, Kid revolutionized a wrestling style of spectacular moves that has been copied by wrestlers all over the world. There are many who say that the Tiger Mask vs. Dynamite Kid matches between 1981-83 were the best matches of all time. In retrospect, they were simply revolutionary by the standards of the time and years ahead of their time. Their April 23, 1983 match at the Old Sumo Hall in Tokyo was not only voted Match of the Year by this publication, but in the 1989 Observer Yearbook was rated by Jeff Bowdren as the second best match of the decade of the 1980s, and named by 6 of 11 video collectors polled by Bowdren as either the best match or tied for the best match of the decade. The success of the feud and the popularity and notoriety Kid gained in Japan from it, he was consistently one of the most popular foreign wrestlers among Japanese fans from his debut in 1979 until his retirement, paved the way for the popularity of the junior heavyweight division in Japan. It also spawned some of the biggest stars in the business, a few of whom under prior standards would have been considered too small for wrestling. Among those who grew up idolizing and patterning their style after him were Chris Benoit, who was such a clone he used to be nicknamed Dynamite Chris, Jushin Liger, who as a rookie in 1984 was nicknamed the Japanese Dynamite Kid, Davey Boy Smith, who became his most famous tag team partner, and Owen Hart, whose repertoire consists largely of moves studied from watching Tiger Mask vs. Dynamite Kid videotapes. After Tiger Mask retired, Kid became the World Junior Heavyweight Champion in both Canada and Japan and also held the Stampede Wrestling version of the North American Heavyweight title. In early 1984, he won what may have been the greatest junior heavyweight tournament up to that point ever in Japan, which included himself, Bret Hart, Davey Boy Smith. Yes, the 270-pound Smith was originally a junior heavyweight, the Cobra, George Takano, Nobuhiko Takada, Black Tiger, Mark Rocco and Kunyaki Kobayashi to capture the WWF Junior Heavyweight title vacated by the retirement of Sayama. He never lost the title, but was stripped of it in late 1984 when he and Smith jumped from New Japan to All Japan prior to that year's tag team tournament. Kid placed second to Ric Flair in the Wrestling Observer newsletter's Wrestler of the Year balloting in 1984. He was also voted by readers as the most impressive wrestler 3 times, 1983-85. In the United States, Kid gained most of his fame from 1985-87 while teaming with Davey Boy Smith as the original British Bulldogs in the WWF, joining the Federation after Vince McMahon bought the Stampede Wrestling territory from Stu Hart. They introduced many popular double-team moves and Japanese-style moves to American wrestling. Kid also popularized moves like the Fast Snap Suplex and was the first wrestler in the United States to use the Superplex while standing on the top rope. He and Smith were voted Tag Team of the Year in 1985. But the style of wrestling that made Stu Hart call Dynamite the gutsiest wrestler who ever lived also led to his shortened career. Anyone who ever saw what some have called the greatest bump ever taken will never forget in the early 1980s, when Kid climbed the top rope, then put his foot on the ring post and dived 3 rows deep in the aisle on an unpadded floor to deliver a diving headbutt to Bruce, or was it Keith, and it really doesn't matter, Hart, which only served to blow out both knees. He was also known for on occasion, including in the match at the WrestleMania 2 in Chicago where he and Smith won the WWF Tag Team titles from Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake, standing on the middle rope, getting hit and falling backward to the floor, taking the bump on his back. Moves like that, and some would say loss of flexibility from pushing his weight up to 220 ripped to the bone pounds through methods all too popular in the WWF those days, led to a serious spinal injury in late 1986 in Hamilton, Ontario, which originally was thought to have been a career ender. While he recovered, after undergoing major back surgery which included fusing discs, he was never the same. Kidd and Smith dropped the tag belts to Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart in Tampa in early 1987. While Kidd had not even recovered from his injury where he was able to walk, Smith carried him to the ring piggyback for the title change match, and Kidd never tagged in during the match. He pretty much had to rely on an intense punch kick and headbutt style of wrestling when he finally recovered. He and Smith left the WWF in late 1988 to return home and book the failing Calgary territory and return to Japan as regulars. The two ended up having a legit falling out, plus ran an angle feud in Calgary. But it wasn't enough to save the dying territory. Toward the end in Canada, apparently frustrated because of the onset of injuries, his fading physical skills and other demons, he got into some out-of-the-ring brawls. Kidd wrestled almost exclusively in Japan in recent years, with his weight dropping back to about 175 pounds and him losing more than an inch in height due to spinal compression. Speaking of the tag team tournament, the finals of the 16th annual tournament were held before a sellout 15,900 fans, which would be a live gate in the $750,000 range, on December 6 at Budokan Hall, and a closed-circuit audience of between 1,500 and 2,000 per location throughout Japan. Going into the final night, Stan Hansen and Spivey were in first place with 20 points. Teams get 2 points for a win and 1 point for a 30-minute time limit draw. In all Japan, there are no such thing as DQ and countout finishes in big matches anymore, with both Steve Williams and Terry Gordy and Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada having 19 and both Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Tao and Andre the Giant and Giant Baba having 18, which I guess explains why they had to redo that match when Misawa was injured, because it was so carefully booked to have 5 teams with a chance to win the tournament going into the final night. Well, Baba and Andre beat Kimalatu, Ben Peacock, and Abdullah the Butcher to give them 20 points, tying them with Hansen and Spivey for the lead. Next came Tsuruta and Tao beating Hansen and Spivey, who if they had won, would have clinched first place, giving both teams and Baba and Andre 20 points. So it went to the last match with Williams and Gordy versus Misawa and Kawada. Whichever team won would win the tournament, but in the case of a time limit draw, there would be 5 teams tied for first place, in which case the show would have probably lasted until 2 a.m. So, after going 25-24 and teasing the time limit draw, Gordy pinned Kawada with a powerbomb, so Gordy and Williams captured the tournament. WWF's Experimental Tuesday in Texas pay-per-view show took place on December 3 in San Antonio before a sellout crowd of 8,000 fans, announced as 20,000 plus by Gorilla Monsoon several times during the show, at the Freeman Coliseum. The card had sold out a day or two in advance, and it was well known locally for some time it would be a pay-per-view show. The 90-minute-long show, which ended at 90 minutes on the dot because satellite time is charged by 30-minute interval, and this was, by WWF standards, a show run on a shoestring budget with no advertising other than on the weekend television, 5 matches, and no production frills like grand ring entrances or pyrotechnics. Most in the cable industry, who look at the bottom line, consider the show a success because they didn't believe going, and the WWF could pull so many buys with only 6 days of lead time and no outside advertising. Most national estimates indicate that Survivor Series the previous Wednesday in Detroit did between a 1.8 and 2.2% buy rate, with our estimates indicating that would be approximately a $7.90 to $8.5 million in gross revenue. Well done from the estimated 3.0 buy rate from the previous year. Blend within the cable industry on the show being held on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving as opposed to its traditional Thanksgiving night, although the WWF made the change specifically because it believed since Thanksgiving night is one of the worst nights of the year when it comes to television viewership, it was a bad night for a pay-per-view. The point I'm making here by bringing this up is that everyone, whether they be cable execs who know nothing about wrestling or WWF execs or those of us who analyze this, can only make conclusions after the fact, because nobody really knows going in whether Thanksgiving is a good or bad night for pay-per-view, or if pay-per-view is simply declining, or if interest in the show was down as compared to previous years. Anyway, Tuesday in Titan appeared to have done about a 1.1% buy rate, or roughly the same as most WCW pay-per-view shows over the past year, but with some companies not carrying the show, with the mistaken belief it would die with no advertising, not realizing that what sells these shows isn't outside advertising but television hype, and I think if anything, this proves it. The universe was down a tad, so the gross was in the $2 to $2.1 million range. So you can look at those numbers in many different ways. The buy rates were the two lowest for Titan in a few years. The combined revenue grossed by Titan Sports, in excess of $4 million, from these two shows, is greater than any single Thanksgiving show had in the past. There were some complaints among cable viewers as if they felt they paid for the first show, which was simply hype to get them to buy a second, but they were minimal. Anyway, I enjoyed the second show because nothing was that bad, and some things were pretty good. It was far from the best show of the year, or even of the past few weeks, but it was entertaining to watch, but not necessarily to listen to, since the gorilla was almost as bad as he'd been the week before, between claims of Skinner being unbeaten since coming to the WWF, 20,000 fans in attendance, and truckloads of misused medical terminology. 1. Bret Hart kept the Intercontinental title, beating Skinner in 1346. It started out kind of slow since Skinner is pretty well past washed up. But Hart carried it to a decent match with a lot of near falls toward the end before Skinner took a bump off the top rope and submitted to the sharpshooter, Scorpion Deathlock. Decent opener. 2 1/4 stars. 2. Randy Savage pinned Jake Roberts in 6:25 with an elbow drop off the top rope. The match itself was only average, but the post-match was pretty memorable. Roberts gave Savage 3 DDTs and Elizabeth came down and kept begging him to stop. Roberts pulled a bag out and they pretended there was a snake in the bag and teased it for about 100 years, at least it seemed that long, climaxing with Jake slapping Elizabeth before Jack Tunney, Dr. Pat Patterson, Dr. Rene Goulet and the like all made the save. This was just about the most dramatic angle I've ever seen. Most angles in wrestling are usually rushed through, a major problem with WCW for some reason, so the needed drama isn't there. If anything, this went on for too long. Lord knows they needed something big to get Roberts over as a main event heel draw. They did something big, but whether it works or not is another story. 3 stars, 2 stars for the match, but add another star for the angle. Gene Okerlund interviewed Jake Roberts after the match and the guy certainly plays his character well. 3. British Bulldog pinned Warlord in 12:45. Both guys' bodies had made major changes in just the previous 6 days, for whatever that's worth, and probably very little. I think a lot of people looked at this match, with one guy who usually does nothing against another guy who almost always is terrible, as a stinker before it started. And aside from a 3-minute full Nelson spot which Monsoon ruined by emphasizing the hold wasn't properly applied, which ruined all the intensity of a possible near submission, which they certainly needed if they were going to use a hold for 3 minutes, this was a good match. These guys are best friends in real life and Bulldog did a lot of good stuff here. While it's impossible for Warlord to be good, in this case he wasn't all that bad. A few near falls before Bulldog won with a crucifix. 2 1/4 stars. 4. Ted DiBiase and Repo Man Barry Darsow beat Virgil and Tito Santana in 11:28. DiBiase may be the best worker in the WWF right now, and he seems to have kicked the effort up a good 50% in the past few weeks, and everyone knows he's got as much ability as anyone. He was the one-man match pretty much. The second best worker was Sherry. Finish saw DiBiase hold Virgil for Sherry to use the shoe, but Virgil ducked and DiBiase got hit. But Repo Man kneed Virgil from behind and DiBiase pinned him anyway. 3 1/2 stars. 5. Hulk Hogan pinned Undertaker in 13:09 to apparently regain the WWF title, which was announced the next day as held up pending the Royal Rumble on January 19 in Albany, New York. The first time I saw this match I thought it was so much better than last week, and the finish was very exciting. But after watching it again, while it may have been better than last week, it was still a 1/2 star match with a star added on because of a hot finish, as opposed to a negative star match with some added on for a good finish the previous week. Long chokeholds, a 2-minute clawhold and poor timing, particularly of Hogan's offense. Undertaker did a few things he didn't do the previous week, but Hogan has very little left except his charisma. Ric Flair came to ringside during the Superman comeback and Hogan hit him with a chair, while Flair fell into Jack Tunney. As Flair got back on the apron, Hogan clotheslined him. Then when Paul Bearer tried to interfere with the urn, Hogan ducked so Undertaker was hit. Hogan then got the urn, threw the dust into Undertaker's eyes and schoolboyed him for the win as Jack Tunney watched, then was announced as new champion and posed. 1 1/2 star. We've got the complete lineups for both the December 12th and January 4th shows at the Tokyo Egg Dome. The December 12th combined WWF/SWS/PWF/EMLL show has Hulk Hogan vs. Genichiro Tenryu, Legion of Doom vs. Natural Disasters for WWF Tag Team title, Yoshiaki Fujiwara vs Ishinriki Aoki Sano vs Rick Martel to create the first WWF Junior Heavyweight Champion. Actually the first since the mid-1980s when New Japan had possession of the old WWF Junior title. Kerry Von Erich vs Ted DiBiase, Rockers vs George and Shunji Takano, Shirahara and Davey Boy Smith vs Haku and Yoshiaki Yatsu, Yoshihiro Asai vs Jerry Estrada, Masakatsu Funaki vs Jerry Flynn, from Florida Indies, Kabuki and Takashi Ishikawa and Samson Fuyuki vs Kendo Nagasaki and Shinichi Nakano and Tatsumi Kitahara, Minoru Suzuki vs Wellington Wilkins Jr. and Kenichi Oya and Don Arakawa and Akira Katayama vs Goro Tsurumi and Apollo Sugawara and Fumihiro Niikura. Last report we had was that SWS officials were hoping for a crowd of 30,000, which would be announced as 64,619, although the vast majority of those would be freebies, and paid attendance was expected to be less than the 18 to 20,000 of the Hogan and Tenryu vs Road Warriors Dome show in March. The complete lineup for the New Japan/WCW card on January 4th, with several of the matches to be put together as part of a 1-hour, 50-minute pay-per-view show airing in February in the United States, will be Riki Choshu vs Tatsumi Fujinami for both the Greatest 18 Club World Martial Arts title and the IWGP World Heavyweight title, and they've announced that both men have agreed this will be their last singles match ever. That means a lot now since Choshu and Fujinami had a legendary feud from 1982-84, selling out big houses every month for like 2 years and almost always wrestling to double countouts in the days that finish was in vogue. They rekindled the feud in 1987 and have had a few singles matches since, the most recent of which was in December of 1990 when Fujinami beat Choshu to win the IWGP title. Also Lex Luger vs Masa Chono for the WCW World Heavyweight title. Keiji Muto and Sting vs Rick and Scott Steiner, Antonio Inoki vs Tiger Jeet Singh for the old NWF World title, Big Van Vader vs El Gigante, Shinya Hashimoto vs Bill Kazmaier, Scott Norton vs Tony Halme in Wrestler vs Boxer, Hiroshi Hazu and Shiro Koshinaka vs Arnold Anderson and Larry Zbyszko, Masa Saito and Kim Duke vs Dustin and Dusty Rhodes, Jushin Liger and Akira Nagami doing a ninja gimmick, and Masashi Aoyagi vs Super Strong Machine and Hiro Saito and Norio Oniga, Kengo Kimura and Kantaro Hoshino vs Kunyaki Kobayashi and Osamu Kido and Black Cat vs TBA. I haven't heard an official advance on this one, so don't know if Jim Ross comments on television this past weekend that 40,000 tickets had already been sold are true or not, but do know they are still hopeful of equaling the record 64,500 fans from last March's show. But for a big show like this, on paper, it really looks like a pretty bad show. There was a news item this past week regarding Mike Tyson challenging Hogan to a match. I don't believe there have even been any negotiations for such a thing, but the potential for big money on pay-per-view is certainly there. I wonder if Tyson realizes what would need to be done in order to get at this big money. Former WWF champ superstar Billy Graham broke his long public, though not private, silence in regards to steroid use in wrestling in a 3+ hour interview for the television show Inside Edition on Monday afternoon. The subject of Hulk Hogan, who grew up idolizing Graham as wrestling's original massively muscular bodybuilder and steroid abuser in the 1970s, did come up during the interview. Graham compared Hogan with former Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry and that he preached one thing and did the exact opposite in his personal life. I believe the segment is set for an early January air date. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a front page of the newspaper story regarding steroid use in the NFL. The story estimated 15 to 20% of the league's players is still using performance-enhancing drugs. The lone difference is pro wrestling has the power to educate its audience however it wants to and to create who it wants to as its stars. In football, or the Olympics, the best players are going to be the stars because it isn't at work. There really is no answer to a drug problem in those sports if the drugs really do work as performance enhancers, and at least in certain circumstances that is the case. Yet in wrestling, in which promoters have control over who they make as stars, the use is far greater than in football or track, although paltry in comparison with bodybuilding. Anyway, one diuretic masking agent that we mentioned a few weeks back called Defen is allegedly being used by some NFL players who use steroids to get negative test results. According to company president Vincent Bovino, Defen was tested on 1,000 steroid users and in only 2 cases did the user fail a steroid test. The story also related an incident, confirmed by one player on the team that year and an employee of the team that year but denied by the Eagles trainer, that in 1988, a group of players on the Philadelphia Eagles flew in a technician who inserted a catheter tube into each player and drained out their steroid-tainted urine and then pumped the players' bladders full with clean urine which he had brought in on a plane. The players then drove to the stadium where they all took, and passed, their steroid test. An interesting thing for all you Hulk Hogan fans, just to show that the Hulk's response to this issue is hardly an isolated one, was the recent claim by Terry Long, the Pittsburgh Steelers lineman, who went from 165 pounds in high school to 285 pounds and is, from a powerlifting standpoint, the strongest man in the NFL, who attempted suicide early this season after failing a steroid test. He was the only player who failed in the entire league. Long, like the Hulk, the Boz and so many others, claimed he used steroids only to rehabilitate himself from a knee injury. This is the final issue of the current 4-issue set. If you've got A1 on your address label, it means your subscription expires with this issue. Renewal rates are $6 for 4 issues, $12 for 8, $24 for 16, $36 for 24, $48 for 32 and $60 for 40 issues within the United States and Canada. Rates for overseas airmail subscriptions are $9 for each set of 4 issues up through $90 for 40 issues. All subscription renewals, letters to the editor, match results, news items, and awards ballots should be sent to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228. Fax messages can be sent afternoon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific, daily to the Observer at 408-378-6562. EMLL. December 6 at Arena Mexico saw Octagon and Ringo Mendoza and Conan win 2 out of 3 falls from Pirata Morgan and MS1 and Chacho Herides in 16-17. The middle fall, the only one the Faces lost, was interesting because Morgan gave Conan a low blow behind the ref's back, but Morgan saw it like Conan had given him a low blow, and the ref DQ'd the Faces. Kind of silly to do a unique finish like that for the middle fall, however, because it meant nothing since the Faces won the third fall anyway. 1 3/4 stars, Misterioso captured the NWA World Welterweight title, winning 2 out of 3 falls from Fuerza Guerrera in 1926. Guerrera had held the championship straight for more than 2 years. The first 2 falls were so-so, but the third fall was really good, ending with a bridge into a backslide finish that Kerry Von Erich used to win the title from Ric Flair in 1984, although Guerrera did get his feet in the ropes as he was being counted down. 3 1/4 stars for all of you Alfonso Morales fans, and judging from the yearbook responses, there are a lot, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but when Morales was talking about the title, he brought up how the NWA is an international organization that has such world-famous wrestlers as Michael Wallstreet and Sid Justice, Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000, and CN Caras beat Atlantis and Rayo de Jalisco Jr., and Anibal in 1209 via DQ, and Anibal unmasked Mascara Año 2000 to set up their mask versus mask match for next week. 1/2 star. Main event was a return hair versus hair match with Dandy versus Satanico. Exactly 51 weeks ago in the same building, these two had a hair match with Satanico losing. That was the best at MLL television match of the past 12 months. This rematch wasn't. Satanico, the heel, won the third fall when Dandy went for the figure 4, but he turned it into an inside cradle in 1935. Flair Sting title change finish from 1990. 2.5 stars. Galavision is now running a second Lucha Libre television show each week, at 1 a.m. Friday nights Eastern Time, 10 p.m. Pacific, which consists mainly of lengthy interviews but also shows 2 or 3 matches from other arenas in Mexico City. A Mexican non-wrestling magazine wrote a story that wrestlers are paid more to lose their hair and masks. The magazine reported that Los Brazos received $67,000 to lose their masks in 1988 to Los Villanos, that the original Rayo de Jalisco received a $20,000 bonus to lose his mask in a 1988 match to the original Blue Demon, and that El Matematico received a similar fee to lose his mask. Oro and Plata won the Mexican tag team titles from Tony Arce and Vulcano on December 4 in Acapulco. Pepe Casas, the father of Negro Casas, continues to work as a babyface ref on television. Negro Casas, who is the middleweight champ for UWA, made an appearance last month in Now Calpon, teaming with Jerry Estrada and Morgan to lose to Conan and Dandy and Lizmark. Dandy challenged Casas to a hair versus hair match, which I guess probably was initially scheduled for this past Friday, but it well through, which is probably why they rushed the Dandy Satanico hair match for last week without any build-up. What was interesting is that even though Dandy is a face and Casas a heel, the fans cheered Casas. Box E Lucha magazine is doing a shoot fan poll, and as of this week's issue, for this promotion, the leaders in the balloting were CN Caras for Wrestler of the Year, Atlantis for Best Babyface, Pierre Roth Jr. for Best Heel, Oro and Plata, 2 Rookie Flyers, for Tag Team of the Year, Caras and Universo 2000 and Mascara Año 2000 for Best Trio, Io de Lizmark for Rookie of the Year, Canadian Vampire Casanova for Best Foreigner, Lola Gonzalez for Women Wrestler of the Year. They also had balloting for Referee of the Year, but that voting apparently was cancelled since obviously the late Grant Davis would have won. Atlantis and Jalisco and Mascara Sagrada beat Emilio Charles Jr. and El Egipcio and Brazo de Plata in a bloodbath in the main event on December 1 at Arena Mexico. New Boxing and Wrestling Commissioner in Mexico City Juan Jose Torres has announced a meeting to investigate excessive blood and violence. 1MLL shows. Mano Negra is going to feud with Pierroth Jr., climaxing with a mask versus mask match in March. Coco Ware is headed here in January, which I believe is booked through the WWF office and not directly with Ware. There was a big show on December 8 in Monterrey headlined by a triple mask versus mask match with the Thundercats versus the Fantasia Trio, Super Muñeco and Super Ratón and Super Pinocchio. The new television ring announcer known as Vitorino is a legit well-known opera star in Mexico City. UWA. December 1 at El Toreo in Naucalpan saw Dos Caras and Gran Hamada and Villano 3 win 2 out of 3 falls from Connect, and Danny Davis and Tony Anthony when Davis hit Anthony by mistake, and he was pinned. Fishman and El Engendro and The Killer won 2 out of 3 falls from Enrique Vera and Transformer and Solar Eye, Black Power and Negro Navarro and El Signo won 2 out of 3 falls from Tamba, and Villano Eye and Phantasma, Momotaro Monkey Magic Wakita, and Babyface Eye and Dr. Wagner Jr. beat Ninja Sasuke, Masamichinoku, and Celestial and El Psicodelico and Samurai, Osamu Matsuda, and Alcone 78 and Marlon Bet El Falcon and Jose Luis Feliciano and Black Terry. Los Villanos kept the trio's title once again beating Signo and Power and Navarro on November 29 in Netzahualcoyot. Vera retained the junior heavyweight title beating Killer on November 30 in Cuernavaca. Hurricane Castillo Jr. returns in late January. Coquina and Fatu started back as a tag team this past Sunday at El Toreo. In awards balloting by the fans in box E. Lucha Mil Mascaras was leading for Best Babyface. After all these years, Negro Casas as Best Heel, Silver King and El Texano as Tag Team of the Year, Rudy Reyna and May Flowers and Pimpinela Escarlata as Best Trio, Cassandro as Rookie of the Year, Chris Benoit as Foreign Wrestler of the Year and El Frezero as Referee of the Year. Foreign wrestlers in the December ratings were Coquina as top contender for heavyweight champ Connect, Big Van Vader as number 2 contender, Gigante Warrior as number 4, Miguelito Perez as number 5, Buffalo Allen, Bad News, as number 6 and Fatu as number 10. Castillo is ranked number 2 contender in the junior heavyweight division. Owen Hart is number 5 contender in the light heavyweight with Chris Benoit number 10. Jushin Liger is number 1 contender for Negro Casas in the middleweights. Fatu and Samoan Savage are number 3 contenders in the tag teams and Perez and Castillo are number 7. Warrior and Perez and Castillo are number 3 in the trios. Coquina and Fatu and Savage are number 5 in the trios and the Mercenaries. Billy Anderson and Louis Piccoli and Tim Patterson usually are number 10 in the trios. The UWA announced that Pero Aguayo, who has been working mainly for MLL, has until January 30 to defend his junior light heavyweight title and his world tag team title he holds with Gran Hamada, or he'll be stripped of both belts. December 8 at El Toreo is headlined by Coquina and Fatu and Signo vs Dos Caras, and Connect and Villano 3 to set up Connect vs Coquina title match sometime next week. A weird show was held on December 6 in Netzahualcoyot where there was an 8-team losers tournament in which the only way to advance is by losing. The final 2 losers meet in the tournament final with the losing team both either losing their hair or mask. The 8 teams were Connect and Dr. Wagner Jr., Dos Caras and Villano 3, Tinieblas Jr. and Senior, Transformer and Solar Eye, Celestial and Alcone 78, Rambo and Babyface, Pimpinela Escarlata and El Bello Greco and Rudy Reyna and Cassandro. December 8 in Naucalpan was a similar 10 singles wrestler mask tournament in the loser in the finals gets unmasked, but none of the big names are entered. Silver King and El Texano, who are this group's best tag team, and probably the best tag team in Mexico, similar to the old Midnight Express, are now touring Guatemala. The main wrestling arena in Juarez across the border from El Paso, Texas, was closed down this past Thursday because they are $12,000 behind in paying taxes and $10,000 behind in paying rent. All Japan. The biggest behind-the-scenes story is that apparently Aki Osato of the SWS office arranged a meeting during the final days of the tag team tournament at the Tokyo Ginza Hotel with 5 of All Japan's biggest foreign stars to arrange for them to jump to the WWF and also work regularly on SWS shows. Apparently 3 of the wrestlers declined to make the jump but 2 others were very interested, and some expect the announcement could be made as early as the Tokyo Dome show on Thursday night. Final tournament standings: 1. Terry Gordy and Steve Williams 21 points, 10-1-1, 2. Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Tao 20, 9-1-2, tied with Giant Baba and Andre the Giant, 10-2, and Stan Henson and Dan Spivey, 10-2, 5. Mitsuharu Masawa and Toshiaki Kawada 19-9-2-1, 6. Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2, 7-5, 7. Joel Deaton and Billy Black 8-4-8, tied with Dan Crawford and Doug Furness, 4-8, and Dory Funk and Al Perez, 4-8, 10. Dynamite Kid and Johnny Smith 6, 3-9, 11. Kenta Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi 4, 2-10, tied with Rusher Kimura and Mighty Inoue, 2-10, and Johnny Ace and Sunny Beach, 2-10. Finals on December 6 at Budokan Hall saw Williams and Gordy beat Misawa and Kawada, Tsuruta and Tao beat Hansen and Spivey, Baba and Andre beat Kimala2 and Abdullah, Kenta Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi beat Joel Deaton and Billy Black, Dory Funk and Al Perez beat Dan Crawford and Doug Furness, and Dynamite Kid and Johnny Smith beat Johnny Ace and Sunny Beach. Dan Crawford is going to Mexico in January. The closed circuiting for the All Japan final night wasn't so much because All Japan is so hot that they needed to closed circuit the show, although it is pretty hot right now, but because Nippon TV wanted to test out new hi-fi television technology. As those of you who receive first-generation or original Japanese tapes know, the picture quality is much higher with better and brighter colors than US television because of better technology. Apparently they've advanced it one step farther, and Nippon TV wanted to test it out before putting it into effect for the Olympics in 1992, and they decided to test it out by doing closed-circuit showings of the tag team tournament finals. Former All Japan wrestler Mitsuaki Hata passed away a few weeks back due to complications from diabetes. Hata wrestled in Florida in the early 1970s and received a small push in Japan in the late 1970s. The television show on December 1st, taped on November 29th in Sapporo, drew a 6.6 rating, which is a 70 share in that time slot, which I believe is the second highest rating ever in the time slot for wrestling. The top matches on the show saw Tsuruta and Tao go to a 30-minute draw with Misawa and Kawada, Crawford and Furness beat Smith and Kid, Butcher and Himala2 beat Ace and Beach, Hansen and Spivey beat Baba and Andre, and Gordy and Williams beat Kikuchi and Kobashi in 22:50. The live show drew a sellout 6,600 fans, which I believe set a record pro wrestling gate for Sapporo. December 2nd in Sendai drew a sellout 5,700 as Andre and Baba beat Misawa and Kawada when Baba pinned Kawada in 13:05. Tsuruta and Tao beat Kobashi and Kikuchi in 18:37. Williams and Gordy beat Black and Deaton. Hansen and Spivey beat Mighty Inoue and Rusher Kimura. Funk and Perez beat Ace and Beach. Smith and Kid and Fuchi beat Yoshinari Ogawa and Furness and Crawford in prelims. December 3rd in Mita drew a sellout 2,800 as Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa in 24:30 when Kawada pinned Ogawa. Williams and Gordy beat Furness and Crawford. Hansen and Spivey beat Ace and Beach. Smith and Kid beat Kimura and Inoue. Kimala2 and Abdullah beat Black and Deaton, and Andre and Baba and Funk beat Motoshi Okuma and Haruka Iganen and Masafuchi. December 4th in Nagoya drew a sellout 3,900 for a television taping as Hansen and Spivey beat Williams and Gordy in 20:40 when Hansen pinned Gordy with a lariat. Tsuruta and Tao beat Crawford and Furness. Misawa and Kawada beat Ace and Beach. Baba and Andre beat Smith and Kid. Inoue and Kimura beat Kobashi and Kikuchi, and Abdullah and Kimala2 beat Funk and Fuchi. December 5th in Hamamatsu before a sellout 3,100 saw Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tsuruta and Tao and Ogawa in 27:41 when Kobashi pinned Ogawa with the moonsault. Williams and Gordy beat Abdullah and Kimala2. Hansen and Spivey beat Funk and Perez. Andre and Baba beat Ace and Beach. Black and Deaton beat Smith and Kid, and Crawford and Furness beat Inoue and Kimura. New Japan. December 6th in Otoru drew 2,280 as Muto and Hashimoto and Fujinami beat Tim Horner and Brad Rheingans, and Bam Bam Bigelow, Choshu and Masasaito beat Norton and Duke. Chono beat Masanobu Kurisu. Kido and Kimura beat Hiro Saito and Oniga. Liger and Kobayashi and Hoshino beat Negro Casas and Black Cat and Katana. From Mexico, and Frank Anderson, Swedish Olympic wrestler, and Koshinaka beat Akira Nagami and Scorpio. New Japan will apparently be doing some sort of an angle this week to heat up the Inoki vs. Singh match for the Dome. The way the story goes, Hazi wants a singles match with Inoki at the Dome, but Inoki had already accepted Singh's challenge. So Hazi is going to Toronto to visit Singh at home to ask him to step aside so he can wrestle Inoki at the Dome, since it's his lifelong dream to wrestle Inoki. Anyway, expect the expected when Hazi visits Singh at home to heat Singh up as a heel once again. Tour opened before 3,000 in Chiba on December 5th as Choshu and Chono and Fujinami beat Duke and Horner and Bigelow, with Chono over Horner with the STF. Ozzy and Muto beat Norton and Rheingans, with Muto over Rheingans with moonsault. Nagami and Liger beat Katana and Casas. Kantaro Hoshino and Hashimoto and Masasaito beat Machine and Hiro Saito and Oniga. Scorpio and Black Cat beat Anderson, and Koji Kanemoto and Koshinaka beat Kurisu via DQ. Kurisu is banned from doing his famous chair shot on the floor. December 8th before a packed house at Korakuen Hall saw Choshu and Hashimoto and Kimura beat Fujinami and Masasaito and Kido in 16:16. when Choshu lariated Kido, Norton and Bigelow beat Muto and Chono when Norton pinned Muto, Nagami and Koshinaka beat Duke and Kurisu, Hasas, and Oniga and Hiro Saito beat Liger and Kobayashi and Masashi Aoyagi when Liger did the job for Kasas, and Hazi and Rangans beat Scorpio and Anderson in a match in which 3 of the 4 Scorpio excluded obviously, all placed in the Olympic Games. Other Japan notes. PWF is planning on running a card on March 20, 1992 at the Knight Center in Miami with Minoru Suzuki, Masakatsu Funaki, Yusuke Fuke, Jerry Flynn, Dwayne Kozlowski, former U.S. Olympic team wrestler, and Wellington Wilkins Jr. appearing. On December 7 in Numazu, Atsushi Onita put over the Sheik in a lumberjack match when after a ref bump, all the heels ran in and gave Onita a stuffed powerbomb allowing Sheik to score the pin. Sheik got over in Japan so well that he'll be a regular in 1992 for FMW. Who would have ever believed it? Lots of heat between SWS and some of the reporters since the SWS office claimed that Hogan had won the title back from Undertaker in San Antonio and would be defending against Tenryu, which some reporters felt was a deceptive way to sell late tickets, when some reporters knew that the title was going to be held up. Japan Cable Television is going to crown the first cable TV women's champion in a one-night tournament on January 23 with Kaoru Maeda, who will probably be put over since she works in the office for Universal, which is sponsoring the tournament, Debbie Malenko, Lady Apache, from Mexico, and one other woman wrestler. Dementia, Cheryl Russo, Pink Cadillac and Magnificent Mimi will be appearing in JWP's January tour and they are trying to add Terry Power as well. Apparently Power had improved her wrestling ability a lot on recent Japan trips. Rumor has it that both Kyuri Suzuki and Atsuki Yamazaki will retire this year, the latter to get married. Dynamite Kansai Miss A. Harley Saito, Namazaki and Devil Masami will appear on the LPWA tapings on December 28 in Panama City, Florida. All Japan women held their awards banquet on Monday night in Tokyo. Bull Nakano was expected to win Wrestler of the Year, but we'll have a complete rundown next week. The final All Japan Women's Show of the Year was the Tag Team Tournament final on December 8 at Tokyo's Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,100 with Kyoko Inoue and Toshio Yamada beating Asia Kong and Bison Kimura to win the tournament in 23-19 when Yamada pinned Kong after a spinning enzouidri off the top rope. Asia and Bison had earlier beaten Bull Nakano and Akira Hokuto in a semi-final match in 22:07 that same night. Highlight of that match saw Hokuto do a dropkick off the top rope to the floor, taking the big bump on her back. In the Texas Death Cage match on the WrestleMarinePiad show on November 21, apparently less than 2 weeks before the card, Asia Kong was hospitalized with appendicitis and wasn't supposed to work. She had her stomach stapled and worked the show anyway. It had been reported in the newspapers about her appendicitis, so the fans all knew about it. Anyway, as a gimmick, they took blood out of some wrestlers before the card and put it in a condom. This is the gimmick they used to use in this country when guys would bleed from the mouth. They'd bite the condom at the right time and put it under her shirt. When Monster Ripper gave her a splash off the top rope, they burst it and her shirt and pants were covered with blood like she was bleeding internally and she did the stretcher job to lose the match. December 3 in Tamiyaki drew 1,250 as Nakano and Hokuto beat Takako Inoue and Mariko Yoshida, Kong pinned Suzuka Manami and Kyoko Inoue and Toshio Yamada beat Yumiko Hata and Bat Yoshinaga. December 4 in Saitama saw Kong and Kimura beat Nakano and Hokuto, Yamada and Inoue beat Manami Toyota and Atsuko Mita, and Takako Inoue and Yoshida beat Manami and Debbie Malenko. JWP on December 3 in Fuji drew a huge crowd as Harley Saito beat Reiko Hoshino, Eagle Sawai and Mayumi Ozaki and Rumi Osawa beat Devil Masami and Kyuri Suzuki and Mami Kitamura plus Terry Power, and Reggie Bennett beat Plum Mariko and Rumi Kazama. Akira Maeda's Rings promotion drew 10,250 on December 7 at the Ariake Coliseum in the Tokyo suburb of Oriyasu, 12,000 capacity but very few freebies, as Maeda beat Fulcon, a Command Samba champion from the Soviet Union whose real name is Gamzakinov Magomed Han. Command Samba is the form of Samba they teach in the Soviet military, which is basically free fighting, in which everything goes except punching, hair pulling, eye gouging and biting, and it goes to the submission. In 12:16 and Masaki Sadake, Japanese karate superstar, drew with Hans Nyman, karate man from Netherlands, Gerard Gordeau, karate champion from France, beat Mitsuya Nagai, Dirk Frey knocked out Willie Peters, Nobuaki Kakuta, Japanese karate, Drew Herman Renting and Shalashvili Zaza beat Koichiro Kimura, who quit Wing to join this group. Supposedly both draw matches were actual shoots but the other matches obviously weren't. Maeda vs. Frey on January 19 at Tokyo Bay NK Hall. FMW from January 5 to January 15 has the Sheik, Sabu, the Gladiator, Big Titan, Horace Boulder, Robbie Van Dama, and Jimmy Backlund. Gladiator, Mike Alfonso and Titan 6-6, 300-pound green monster from Calgary, are doing dives over the top rope with the grace of kendo, so I'm told, which is amazing for their size. One of the headhunters, 400-pounder from Puerto Rico, is doing cross bodies off the top rope to the floor on wing shows. I believe Onita and Goto won the tag team tournament. Big surprise, huh? On December 9th at Tokyo Bay NK Hall, which would make them the first FMW World Tag Team Champions. December 2nd in Fukushima drew a sellout 2,614 as Onita and Goto beat Mark Starr and Horace Boulder, Gregory Varichev and Koba Krutenize beat Rufus Blackbone and Leon Spinks, Titan and Gladiator beat Katsuji Ueda and Calypso Jim, Sheik and Sabu beat Ricky Fuji and Shooter and Mercenaries beat Pandita and Amigo Ultra. December 3rd in Kiri drew a sellout 3,892 as Titan and Gladiator beat Onita and Asako in a street fight. Spinks and Blackbone beat Sheik and Sabu in 148 when Spinks KO'd Sabu. Varichev and Krutenize beat Kon Sun Min and Kim Shunki. Taekwondo guys from South Korea and Star and Boulder beat Jim and Ueda. December 5th at Tokyo's Korakuen Hall before a packed house of 2,300 saw Varichev and Onita and Goto beat Star and Titan and Gladiator in a street fight in 8:03. Fuji and Asako beat Spinks and Blackbone when Spinks accidentally KO'd his partner. Sheik and Sabu beat Koreans. The WWF will send Davey Boy Smith, Barbarian, Berserker and Shawn Michaels to the SWS January tour. As you can see, the WWF does its best job, with the exception of Michaels, in continuing to send the kind of workers who can best get over working Japanese style. Haku, who is now a regular for SWS, but under contract to WWF, will be sent as well. The UFI Big Show on December 22nd at Tokyo Sumo Hall, which will be an easy sellout, headlined by Nobuhiko Takada vs. boxer Trevor Berbick and current cruiserweight champ James Walling vs. Billy Scott, has added Luthes to the show as a referee. Chikusa Nagao, 27, the most popular woman wrestler of all time, is now starring in a hit opera called Ring, which is a story of a girl who grew up to be the most popular woman wrestler of all time, which is doing sellout business every night in Tokyo. Universal announced shows for January 17th with Los Brazos vs. Punish and Crush and Kendo Dos Cars and Gran Hamada and Pero Aguayo vs. Silver King and El Texano and Dr. Wagner Jr., Lightning Kid vs. Jerry Lynn for GWF Light Heavyweight title and Canelo Casas and Pantera 2 vs. Tony Arce and Vulcano. January 19th afternoon show at Korakuen Hall has Brazos vs. Casas and Kendo and Solar Eye, Punish and Crush defending UWA Intercontinental Tag Team title against Lightning Kid and Jerry Lynn, Aguayo and Hamada defending UWA World Tag Team titles against Silver King and Texano. January 19 p.m. show has Punish and Crush vs. Villanos 4 and 5, Hamada and Aguayo vs. Brazo de Oro and Brazo de Plata, and January 23 has Lightning Kid vs. Punish for the GWF Light Heavyweight title. Blackbone and FMW, who I speculated on as maybe being Dick the Bruiser's son, is actually Rufus Blackbone, billed as a pro boxer. On November 29th during a tag match with Onita and Tarzan Goto vs. Sheik and Sabu, Sheik threw fire at Goto and the fireball caused a legit medium-sized fire, and there was some minor panic as Sheik grabbed a fire extinguisher and put the fire out. Eddie Gilbert, Scotty Anthony, Tom Pritchard, TNT Waterman, Ricky Santana, and Mil Mascaras are among those appearing on December 10th at Korakuen Hall for the debut of the new Wings promotion. I believe through Gilbert, they are going to try and forge a relationship with GWF. Anthony was about to be recommended to be brought back to All Japan as a regular as a tag team partner of Steve Dahl. The problem is that a lot of US wrestlers don't realize the weird political structure in Japan, and that anyone who works for one of the smaller offices is pretty much blackballed, with rare exceptions, from the two big offices because of the unwritten business rules there that promotions don't raid one another, although SWS isn't playing by those rules since they are the upstart. So the idea that many have that they'll do well with a small group and then get noticed by All Japan or New Japan and be brought in for more money just doesn't happen. Another similar example to this was that Bill Eadie and Masa Saito were working to bring Lightning Kid to New Japan, but he went with Universal, so that pretty much killed it. For those interested in going to Japan for the January Tokyo Dome, the Korakuen area will be loaded with wrestling that week. All Japan has afternoon shows on January 2nd and January 3rd at Korakuen Hall. On January 4th, All Japan Women have a noon show. The Dome show is 3 p.m. and FMW is at Korakuen at 6:30 p.m. January 5th has All Japan Women for an afternoon show and FMW for a night show. January 6th has another FMW show, and January 9th has UFI. All in all, there are 17 cards in January at Korakuen Hall alone and something like 21 shows in Tokyo. Global. December 6th at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 685 fans. Tapings for December 30th, ESPN saw Jerry Lynn beat Body Snatcher, who is said to be terrible, via DQ, Eddie Gilbert pinned Gary Young when there was a ref bump and Gilbert choked Young out using his belt, and Steve Simpson pinned Sweet Daddy Falcone. For December 31st, ESPN saw Mike Davis beat Ben Jordan, and John Tatum and Rod Price kept the GWF Tag Team titles, beating Black Bart and Rattlesnake. Price drew Simpson in a dark match. Then for January 1st on ESPN, the Dark Patriot, Doug Gilbert, debuted and pinned Jordan using the Patriot Missile. Chaz and Tug Taylor beat Dogs of War and Bill Irwin double count out with Body Snatcher. Finale was a dark match where Chaz and Tug Taylor beat Mike and Tom Davis. After the match, Body Snatcher and just about everyone else on the card ran in for a free-for-all. December 13th show is Gilbert vs. Terry Garvin, Falcone vs. Irwin, Price vs. Bart, Tatum vs. Rattlesnake, Lowell Payne with Samantha vs. Sam Houston with Baby Doll. Patriot Del Wilkes will obviously feud with Dark Patriot if he stays with this group. Apparently WCW has also shown interest in Wilkes, so his time with this group may be short-lived. The Christmas week show, if Patriot is still around, is scheduled to be headlined by Patriot vs. Scotty Anthony in a 2 out of 3 fall match for the North American title, Irwin and Bart vs. Tatum and Price for the tag team title, Lightning Kid vs. Jerry Lynn for the light heavyweight title, Gilbert vs. Garvin and Lady X vs. TBA for the LPWA title. USWA. December 2nd in Memphis drew 650 as Spirit of America and Black Cat, JT Smith, beat Doug Masters and Bart Sawyer, Candyman, Reggie B. Fine beat Gravedigger, Sandman beat Brian Christopher, The Warrior pinned Tony Falk, Tom Pritchard beat Eric Embry to win the Southern title, Jerry Lawler beat Kimala to regain the USWA title, and the Moondogs beat Jeff Jarrett and Robert Fuller to keep the USWA tag team titles. December 3rd in Louisville saw Falk beat Cat, Sandman beat Pritchard, Fuller beat Masters via DQ when Sawyer interfered, Embry beat Spirit of America when Falk interfered, and Jarrett pinned Gravedigger. November 28th in Nashville saw Masters and Sawyer beat Fuller and Mike Mitchell, real name Mike Holt, already gone from the promotion, and he isn't the only one, via DQ. Pritchard beat Gravedigger via DQ, Jarrett beat Falk, Embry beat Spirit when Falk interfered, and afterwards Spirit stuffed Falk in a garbage can and in a loser gets tarred and feathered. Jarrett and Pritchard and Spirit of America beat Embry and Falk and Gravedigger when Falk lost the fall and was tarred and feathered. Bill Dundee and Billy Travis have both quit, while Black Cat, Sandman and Warrior are all either about to head back to Philadelphia or more likely are already back. On television December 7th, Moondogs beat Spirit and Warrior, and they kept beating on Spirit after winning the match. Embry debuted a new valet named CJ, and he's got a haircut and wears better looking clothes. Also on TV December 7th, Lawler gave Kimala a rematch for the USWA title, which was a 3-stars match with Lawler working like he did when he was younger in carrying a slug to a good match. Finish saw Kimala hit ref Frank Morrell with a chair while Lawler threw fire, so Morrell ruled it a double DQ and ordered the title belt held up. What a week to be doing that one, huh? Pritchard was scheduled to wrestle Falk, but Embry DDT'd Pritchard on the floor and he juiced. Jarrett and Fuller wrestled Sawyer and Masters. In the first fall, when Fuller moved, Sawyer accidentally dropkicked Masters and Sawyer and Masters broke up with Sawyer going babyface and doing a Bart Simpson gimmick. Moondog Spike Bill Smithson then joined Masters in the second fall after Sawyer had left, and Moondog's Spot interfered with a can opener, and Jarrett and Fuller both juiced heavy. December 9th in Memphis has Spirit vs. Falk, Sawyer vs. Tony Anthony, back from Mexico Masters vs. Candyman, Lawler vs. Kimala for the held-up title, Pritchard vs. Embry in a match where Pritchard puts up the Southern title and Embry puts up Falk's hair, and Moondogs vs. Jarrett and Fuller for the USWA tag team titles. This just in, Kimala regained the title on December 9th before about 600 fans. He and Lawler had a very good match, and Jarrett and Fuller vs. Moondogs was also a very good brawl. Oregon. December 7th in Portland saw Don Harris beat the Grappler using his feet on the ropes, and Al Madrill beat C.W. Bergstrom using a loaded mask in the first 2 matches. Then Steve Dahl wrestled Ron Harris, which saw Don Harris use a chain on Dahl and both brothers, then attacked 79-year-old Don Owen and roughed him up, with Don not selling and fighting back and looking pissed off and ornery, although he looks that way most of the time anyway, until Grappler made the save. During an interview, Owen grabbed the mic and said, "You guys think you're big shots just because they took you to Texas," in reference to Ron and Don Harris getting WWF tryouts at the tapings in Texas. Owen then ordered a cage match between the 4 for Christmas night, and Dahl and Grappler said they were going to bring handcuffs and handcuff the Harris boys to the cage and allow Owen to use his belt to whip both of them after the match. Madrill, who lost his hair a few weeks back, is wearing an old Grappler mask, and Grappler came out and said Madrill stole one of his old masks because it looked just like it, and challenged Madrill to a match for next week. John Rambo beat Moondog Moretti, and in the main event, Brickhouse Brown and Jesse Barr beat Billy Jack Haynes and Mike Miller, with Miller doing the job, but after the match, Miller beat up both faces with a 2x4 to set up a rematch for next week. Art Barr will be returning from Mexico to work as Beetlejuice for shows in Washington over Christmas week. Barr was turned down in his request for a license in Oregon by the Commission on 3 grounds. 1. His 1986 conviction of a felony-controlled substance charge, cocaine. 2. Lying on his application in 1988 about never having been convicted of any crime other than minor traffic violations. And 3. His guilty plea for first-degree sexual abuse. But several members of the Commission are near the end of their terms, and Barr and his attorney, Jeffrey Merrick, are attempting to apply for the positions that are opened up in order to get him reinstated. Here and there. The world's most well-liked man, Herb Abrams, in his latest escapades has sent a threatening legal letter to the father of a 15-year-old newsletter writer who criticized him, claimed to have trademarked the name American Wrestling Federation, and threatened legal action against Gordon Scozzari if he uses the AWF name for his shows this coming week, and has claimed to have signed Jimmy Snuka and Hercules to 1-year contracts. No word on what Titan thinks about that, but clearly Hercules is still working for Titan right now, although Snuka's name seems to have disappeared. Shari Helwig, known by some as Mrs. Ultimate Warrior, is featured in this month's Playboy lingerie magazine. I'm scheduled for an appearance on December 26th on the nationally syndicated Sports Byline USA radio show from 11 to midnight Eastern Time, that's 8 to 9 on the West Coast. LPWA is planning a February 23rd pay-per-view show. Best interview in recent memory was by Jim Cornette on the debut show of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. He goes off on the 2 big corporations, cartoon wrestling, steroids, and more. Larry Sharp is opening up a new monster factory in the Tampa, Florida area. It'll be opening on April 5, 1992 with a WrestleMania party. For more info, call the Monster Factory in Paulsboro, New Jersey for information. Joel Goodhart ran 3 shows over this past week, headlined by Paul Orndorff beating Buddy Landel via DQ. Iqua on December 5 in Tampa drew 125 as Rico Federico beat Jumbo Beretta, Robbie Van Dama beat Jerry Flynn, Dick Slater pinned Ricky Johnson due to outside interference of Kevin Sullivan, Kenny Kendall beat Sullivan via DQ, and Sullivan beat up ref Mickey J and Canadian Bad Boy and Tex Salinger DDQ Hurricane Walker and Lou Perez. Next week is Perez versus Sullivan, and they announced Junkyard Dog and Coco were coming in. This group is now running almost exclusively Thursday night shows in Tampa. CWF/Suncoast on December 7 in Tampa drew 250, headlined by Van Dama beat Barretta via DQ for Barretta's Suncoast Florida title, and Tommy Star DDQ Sullivan managed by Woman. Word I've got is that LPWA brought in Barry Horowitz and Tim Horner to work a few mixed matches on TV, and they completely stole the show. Charlie Norris beat Tejo Khan to win the PWA title in Minnesota on a show a few weeks back that drew 750 fans. A group called AWF in Puerto Rico ran a tournament on December 7 in Caguas to create tag team champions, won by a team called Solid Gold beating the Power Twins from New York. Among those in the tournament included the Super Medics, Jose Estrada and son Julio Estrada, Jose Luis Rivera, Hercules Ayala, Chicky Star, TNT, and Ray Gonzalez. Dick Murdoch now booking for WWC in Puerto Rico, and December 7 in Carolina, Puerto Rico saw Carlitos Colon beat Manny Fernandez in an I Quit match. Murdoch pinned Invader number 1. Jose Gonzalez Miguelito Perez beat Fidel Sierra to win the Caribbean title. Hurricane Castillo Jr. beat Bronco number 1. Ricky Santana and Giant Warrior beat Heartbreakers. Wendell Cooley and Frankie Lancaster via DQ. Rex King pinned Randy Rhodes, and Galan Mendoza beat Herb Gonzalez. Murdoch beat TNT on November 23 in Arroyo to win the WWC television title. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling held a television taping on December 7 in Fairmont, North Carolina before 560 fans, putting over Roughhouse Graham, Tommy Angel, Greg Bobkick, Jeff Collett, Vince Torelli, Wayne Shamrock in PWF, Ring Lords of Patriot Del Wilkes, German Stormtrooper Helmut Hessler, Wahoo McDaniel, and Tommy Gunn. They'll hold a tourney for their SAPWA title on January 11 in Roseboro, North Carolina. Patriot was acknowledged as GWF North American champ and said he wanted to add the SAPWA title. Next taping is January 4 with McDaniel, Patriot, and Junkyard Dog. Grand Slam USA drew 250 on November 30 in Columbia, Tennessee with a new gimmick, a Lights Out match of Mephisto and Dante and the Scorpion versus Freddie Morton and the Sheik, George Weingeroff, and Herbie Weingeroff, in which the loser of the fall, Scorpion, had to parade around the ring wearing a bra. A new group called Pile Driver Promotion scheduled to start running monthly starting December 28 at Memorial Hall in Kansas City, which is claiming to have Butch Reed, Kimala, Bob Orton, Honky Tonk Man, Skander Akbar, Bulldog Bob Brown, John Tatum, Rod Price, Dave Peterson, and Gary Jackson for the first show, and they're trying to add Dick Slater and Dick Murdoch as well. First show will have a 25-man Royal Rumble-style battle royal where they enter to a cage, then have to climb the cage to get into the ring. Western States Wrestling Association drew 300 on November 23 in San Bernardino with Larry Bulldog Sampson beating Samoan Cannibal via DQ in the main event and Dr. Dream, Bob Bradley Sr., and Scott Cole over Black Nightmare, Scott Bazo, and Louis Spiccoli. Newsletter writer and correspondent Kurt Brown Viva La Lucha worked the opener, putting over David Electric Youth Gibson in what must have been an interesting one to watch since Gibson is 6'6" and Brown is a whole lot shorter than that. For Lucha Libre fans in Los Angeles, there are now weekly 5:30 p.m. shows every Sunday at the All National Center at 213 North Soto Street. For more info, call 213-266-0612. Mark Lewin's tour of Malaysia and Singapore is currently going on with Bad News Brown, Demolition Axe, Smash, and Crush, Boris Zhukov, Coco Ware, Jim Powers, Junkyard Dog, and One Man Gang. Red Bastion is along as ref. Windy City Wrestling drew an SRO crowd of 450 on December 7 at Da Vinci Manor in Chicago, headlined by champ Ron Powers beating Frank Nelson via DQ in a cage match. Steve Regal worked underneath. WWF. The Rockers split-up took place after Tuesday in Texas was over on December 3 in San Antonio. It started with a match between Legion of Doom vs. Rockers, which was said to have been better than any match on the pay-per-view show, which load and after the match, Michaels slugged Jannetty. They then did a barbershop segment where Beefcake asked what was wrong. Michaels said nothing was wrong but Jannetty said something was. They started arguing. Anyway, Jannetty told Michaels that he was turning his back and when he turns around, if Michaels was still there, they'd continue as a team but if Michaels wanted to quit, he could walk away and that would be it. Jannetty turned around, Michaels was still there, they hugged, but then Michaels superkicked Jannetty and threw him through the barbershop window and Jannetty juiced heavily. TV taping on December 4 in Austin, Texas before a heavily padded 7,500 half house started with a mat chat with Kerry Von Erich and Big Boss Man speaking to an audience of Cub Scouts and their parents, giving speeches about not using drugs and always being honest and honoring your parents, and they answered questions, all of which had to be submitted in advance. Kerry talked about the deaths of David, Mike and Chris and said that David had died in Japan after a Japanese wrestler kicked him over and over again. Well, so much for the being honest part. He was honest about Mike and Chris. Bossman came off as honest, however. Chris Chavez beat JW Storm, Jeff Warner, in a dark match. Load beat Rockers in a tag team title match taped for Superstars. Michaels accidentally superkicked Jannetty, who fell to the floor. Jannetty never got back up and Michaels ended up being pinned. After the match, Michaels shoved and slapped Jannetty 2 1/4 stars. Bret Hart beat Mountie with a sharpshooter in a match that saw in this order Nasty Boys, Jim Duggan and Sergeant Slaughter, Natural Disasters and Load all at ringside cheering guys on 2.5 stars. Load beat Disasters via DQ 1 1/2 star. Von Erich beat Rick Martel via DQ and Martel sprayed Von Erich with Arrogance 1 1/2 star. This was to start a feud between the two of them, Owen Hart, now billed as Owen the Rocket Hart, and Jim Neidhart, both still wearing those hideous pants, beat Nasty Boys via DQ 2 stars. Jake Roberts and Undertaker beat Jim Duggan and Randy Savage via DQ when Savage hit Roberts with a chair 2 stars. A WWF employee actually pulled the chair out from under the ring in full view of the fans right before the finish. Jamison was at ringside for 2.5 hours and was wearing a WWF backstage pass in clear view on ringside fans, and the finale saw Hulk Hogan beat Ric Flair via countout 2.5 stars. Others who received tryouts at the various Texas tapings included Brian Lee, who looked good, Kevin Von Erich, who it appears will be hired but nobody has a clue as to why. Actually I do. They can in newspaper ads just bill Von Erich versus Martel and send both to the arenas, figuring one will no show every night but as long as the other makes it they won't have to change the card. Chris Adams, Sir Charles Wright aka Soul Taker doing a British gimmick that may turn into a Voodoo Man gimmick, and Ron and Don Harris. Supposedly they like the Harris brothers, although it seemed Charles and Von Erich have the best shot at employment. They announced in Austin that the title was held up pending the Royal Rumble. Sid Justice was at television and telling people he'd start back at Royal Rumble. Despite what so many have said, Sid won't be buried at all upon his return but work with Undertaker at house shows once again. Looks like Vince McMahon and Mr. Perfect will be the duo on Superstars from this point forward, with Randy Savage and Roddy Piper both out. December 7 in Denver drew 2,100 as British Bulldog pinned Barbarian. Mel Phillips took a big bump from Barbarian, which he was none too pleased about. Tito Santana pinned Kato. Sergeant Slaughter beat Ted DiBiase via DQ when Sherry interfered. Very good match. Hart beat Mountie by submission. Good. Undertaker pinned Duggan. Undertaker totally over as the face. Bad match. Nasty Boys beat Rockers in 1942. Great. Von Erich beat Berserker in 143 and Savage pinned Roberts with an elbow off the top. Average. Dave Heckner is back as referee since Earl Heckner about 2 weeks ago took a chair shot from Roddy Piper which needed something like 24 stitches to close and they had to shave his head to stitch him up. All-American Wrestling on December 1st drew a 3.2 rating, coming between pay-per-view shows, which is its best in a long time. However, prime time on the night before the pay-per-view fell back to a 2.3 rating. December 8th in St. Louis drew 7,900 as Hogan beat Flair via countout, Load beat Disasters via DQ, IRS pinned Bossman, Virgil pinned Skinner, Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers, Warlord pinned Valentine and Chavez pinned Hercules. December 7th in Omaha drew 2,800 as Chavez beat Hercules, Warlord pinned Valentine, Beverly's beat Bushwhackers, Virgil pinned Skinner, Bossman pinned IRS, Load Hawk pinned Typhoon and Flair pinned Piper. Load Animal missed a few shots during the week because the airlines had lost his ring gear. He ended up working St. Louis in street clothes. December 6th in Houston saw Santana beat Kato, Von Erich beat Berserker, Nasty Boys beat Rockers, Slaughter beat DiBiase via DQ, Hart beat Mountie, Hawk beat Typhoon and Flair pinned Piper. December 6th in Memphis drew 5,000 for opening week of the new Pyramid Building as Warlord pinned Valentine, Chavez beat Hercules, Virgil pinned Skinner, Bulldog pinned Barbarian, Savage pinned Roberts, Bossman pinned IRS, Undertaker pinned Duggan and the Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers. December 8th in Cape Girardeau, Missouri drew 1,800 as Chavez beat Hercules, Warlord pinned Valentine, Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers, Virgil pinned Skinners, IRS pinned Bossman, Hawk pinned Typhoon and Flair pinned Piper. November 29th in Lexington drew 4,300 as Santana pinned Kato 2 stars, Duggan pinned Warlord 1 star, Nasty Boys beat Rockers 2.5 stars, Flair pinned Piper 3 stars, Virgil pinned Skinner 1.5 star, Von Erich pinned Berserker 1.5 star, IRS pinned Bossman 1 star, Hart pinned Mountie 3 stars. WWF found itself in some hot water over an incident in Vancouver during a Bushwhackers vs. Beverly Brothers match. British Columbia gay activist Ken Walker demanded an apology from the WWF over the faggot chants by Bushwhackers and portrayal of the Genius character. They sent the message that it's okay to abuse gays and make them an object of hatred. The WWF verbally apologized to Walker, but it's gone farther as Vancouver City Hall has asked the WWF to send in a written apology for the behavior of the Bushwhackers. WCW. Results from December 9th at Center Stage in Atlanta before 575 fans saw taping for this coming Saturday's TBS show, and the December 21st version. For December 14th, Marcus Alexander Bagwell debuted with the Sprayberry High School, a school in Marietta, Georgia, coat of arms on his right hip. I don't know why they play Bagwell's high school in Marietta up so big on national television. Some talk that they'll be bringing in Lou Perez to team with Bagwell. Cactus Jack pinned Pez Whatley. Patriots beat Young Pistols in a match where neither came to the ring wearing tag belts. It was an elimination tag match which saw Chip and Armstrong pinned respectively and Todd CF champion pinned Smothers to win the match. The match where Pistols win the U.S. tag belts airs on television on December 15th. Steve Austin kept the TV title beating Arachneman when Medusa interfered. Thomas Rich and Buddy Lee Parker beat Mike Graham and Big Josh. Ricky Steamboat pinned Bobby Eaton in a 3 3/4 stars match. Austin did a run-in after, but Barry Windham made the save. For December 21st they taped a 2.5-hour show. Windham announced that due to his injury, he wouldn't be working Starrcade. I'm told now that Windham may work as early as January wearing a heavy protective cast on his wrist. Dallas Page beat Johnny Rich in what I was told was a must-see singles match which was said to be easily the worst match of the year, and Rich seemingly wound up with a broken nose from a clothesline too high and Page did a high knee but the toe of his boot caught Rich in the groin. A 2 out of 3 fall match in which the loser of the third fall had to leave all television wrestling for 60 days saw Pistols beat Patriots to keep the U.S. tag belts with Chip being pinned for the third fall. Mike Graham beat Thomas Rich. Alexandra York, with her hair down, still at ringside. Steamboat beat Austin via DQ in a TV title match. I'm not making this one up. Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin and the Bad Street Band have a concert on December 20th at Center Stage. Most of the big names are in England, which is why there was something of a skeleton crew working the tapings. December 2nd in Sunrise, Florida drew 183 as Tom Zenk pinned John Peterson, Brian Pillman pinned Graham, Patriots beat Pistols, Medusa beat Bambi, Van Hammer pinned Bad Street, Brad Armstrong as a heel, Dustin Rhodes pinned Oz, worst match which says something for Oz, Big Van Vader and Diamond Stud beat Freebirds and Sting pinned Cactus Jack. Told nothing better than 2 stars on this card. December 5th in Melbourne, Florida drew 430 as Steve Austin beat Firebreaker Chip 1 star, Oz pinned Peterson Dud Vader and Oz double countout Patriots 1/2 star, Arachneman pinned Terrence Taylor 3/4 star, Jack pinned Hammer 2 1/4 stars and Steiners beat Arnold Anderson and Larry Zbyszko 1 star. Missy Hyatt and Eric Bischoff are now hosting a specific version of WCW Pro just for the Los Angeles market. Harley Race is staying, although he may be pulled from Lex Luger. Race will manage Vader and Mr. Hughes, who will work a January program with Rick and Scott Steiner. Also expect some Luger vs. Scott Steiner matches in early 1992. Ron Simmons returns December 29 for Starrcade from his torn wrist tendon injury suffered 2 weeks before Halloween Havoc. On the Wrestling Hotline, Jim Ross brought up several names in regards to coming to WCW. He called Ultimate Warrior coming in a big long shot. December 6 in Perry, Florida drew 650 as Graham beat Peterson 1 1/2 star, Rackman pinned Taylor 3 1/2 stars, Austin pinned Chip 2 stars, Patriots DDQ Oz and Austin 2 stars, Jack pinned Hammer 3 stars and Steiners beat Anderson and Zbyszko 3 stars. It should be noted that since the hearing in Florida, since the commission bill is now pending, the committee agreed on December 10 to continue to look at the bill and scheduled further debate for mid-January, that both WWF and WCW have been posting signs in front of the buildings at their matches to alert fans before they come in or purchase walk-up tickets of no-shows and card changes. Since neither group is doing that in the other 49 states, that does say something. It should also be noted that the actual bill was authored by Don Hazelton, who runs the Boxing Commission in Florida, who did no investigation into pro wrestling, and not Janet Clark, who did. So the bill, as it was written and presented this week, has a number of major problems to the point that in its present form, without revision, I'd be against its passing. Too many regulations regarding no fighting outside the ring, even with barricades up between spectators and wrestlers at ringside, making it illegal to fix matches or for participants to work in collusion with each other, which is the very basis of what pro wrestling is, that make it unworkable given what wrestling is, and illegal for a wrestler to wrestle more than one match during a 24-hour period, which would eliminate the chance to either promote double shots or television tapings in Florida. These provisions need to be eliminated, or you've got something that is going to wind up doing the industry no good and create legislation in areas that simply isn't needed. The last thing needed is a bill to create unenforceable regulations. One interesting section stated that upon substitution of either advertised main event participant or cancellation of the scheduled main event, the promoter shall refund the full purchase price of a ticket to each person presenting a ticket for a refund within 30 days after the scheduled date of the event. I don't think that regulation is too strong if a company willfully false advertises talent they know won't be appearing on a regular basis, but the regulation needs to be written with enough leniency that the nature of pro wrestling is that last-minute injuries and problems do occur, and as long as the promotion does its best to inform fans of the problems as soon as they know about them. Updating advertising, at least for the major groups, if a main eventer isn't going to be there, or at the very least post signs in front of the building in the case of a last-minute problem, then the promotion is playing fair with its audience, which is all that should be asked of them. It's the blatant and willful false advertising that's a problem. Need to make a correction regarding the info from here last week regarding the Starlight Foundation and the Starrcade show. We mistakenly reported last week that 4 cents of every order for Starrcade goes to Starlight Foundation, but depending upon which source has told me, it's either really 8 cents, 4 cents from Turner Home Entertainment and 4 cents from cable operators, or 16 cents, 4 cents of the added price, 4 cents from cable operators and an added 8 cents from Turner Home Entertainment. Theoretically, that would mean somewhere between $12,000 and $24,000 that the show would raise for Starlight Foundation. As a trade-off, WCW was hoping to get a major celebrity like John Candy to be a part of Starrcade, but it doesn't seem to have happened, although Starlight will be sending a minor celebrity to the show. December 7 in Jacksonville drew 3,100 as Josh and Graham beat Taylor and Morton, who broke up after the match, 3 stars, Arachnaman pinned Oz 1/2 star, Vader pinned Peterson 1/2 star, Austin pinned Pillman 3 1/2 stars, Scott Steiner pinned Hughes 2 3/4 stars, Jack pinned Hammer 3 stars, Rhodes and Steamboat beat Anderson and Zbyszko 3 stars, Rude beat Sting via DQ 3 stars, and Luger pinned Rick Steiner due to outside distraction from Harley Race 2.5 stars. PN News missed the end of the week's shows as he had to return home in Nebraska for some kind of family emergency. WCW will once again start advertising locally for house shows in January. Lots of hot action on WCW this week with a very good Rhodes vs. Eaton match and an excellent Jushin Liger vs. Chris Benoit match. They also aired the last 5 minutes of the 45-minute draw from the Omni with Rhodes and Steamboat vs. Anderson and Eaton. While the action was very good in that one as well, they did nothing to use it to change or advance the storyline, so in other words, we're getting a lot of great action but with no real meaning, which is a whole lot better than average or non-action without meaning. Cactus Jack and Van Hammer had a match on Worldwide that was clumsy in spots but still watchable, ending in a double countout. Hammer is a lot more bearable now given that he's just another green rookie who at least tries rather than that job they tried of just shoving him down everyone's throats while fans rejected him en masse. They also had a very good 8-man on WCW with Patriots and Pillman and News versus Rich and Morton and Pistols. But even though Liger's Osai moonsault to the floor against Benoit was hot, the hottest move of the weekend when Medusa doing the crossbody block off the top rope to the floor onto Michael Hayes. It's one thing to do it in wrestling gear, but to balance on the top rope in dress shoes is something else, and she had problems with her balance, but once she took off, it was like watching Osai do the same move and even blew away the similar great move Marty Jannetty did at Survivors. WCW on November 30th did a 3.3 rating, Rhodes and Steamboat vs. Morton and Taylor, Pillman vs. Cactus Jack among others, which ties its high for the year, while Main Event did a 2.4 and Power Hour 1.7. December 3rd in Fort Pierce, Florida drew 670 with Sting missing the Main Event against Cactus and Van Hammer subbing and going to a double DQ, which was doubly bad because the Main Event was the worst match on the show. In other bouts, Freebirds beat Stud and Vader, Pillman beat Graham, Patriots beat Pistols, Bad Street beat Terry Davis, Zank pinned Peterson, Medusa beat Bambi and Rhodes pinned Oz. Pro Wrestle Machine out.